In this video, I'm going to begin to touch on a subject that has been of interest on social media and in other places recently, that of the police and policing and law enforcement and the involvement of this important agency of the state in our lives. I'll briefly talk a little bit about my own credentials and experience in this area, give you some history, and I believe that will be of interest to anyone involved in or whose family or friends are involved with law enforcement, the judiciary, in government activity, in the development of regulation, law, social policy, and indeed in media and wider life interest. I'll make this relevant also because I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in our world today, because the role of the police has taken center stage right across the West. So a little bit of my own background. I've worked with police and law enforcement agencies, the judicial system, over many years. I'm based in England, and I've trained police officers. I've developed programs for their own professional and personal development to enable the police to be more effective, especially in areas of communications and within a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic community. I did that in the centre of London for a number of years, in Kensington and Chelsea, which some of you may know as being the home to the famous, or sometimes infamous, Notting Hill Carnival. I've worked extensively in what in Britain is called council or local authority or social housing, and in America might be called welfare housing, and the same in Australia actually. And often the folk who live in these estates may be disproportionately the subject of interest by the police, by law enforcement, but also they are people who suffer from years of disadvantage, and there are a number of historic challenges in these areas. So I've worked, as I say, extensively with the police. In fact, in my early years, I thought of a police career myself. So I completely support the principle of policing. In fact, growing up in London, actually we never saw police officers as youngsters, because in those days, and I'm talking about the early 60s, there was a great deal of respect for authority, for law and order, and for our elders. This is something which sadly is missing from so much of life in the West today, and I believe we do need a renaissance of that sort of respect. The problem facing us, especially in Britain, and I think this is true in other parts of the West as well, it's certainly true in Australia, and especially in Melbourne and Victoria, where the state is virtually locked down, as is that city, as what appears to be an experiment in martial law is being carried out. Also, we've seen in England, on the streets of London and in many other cities, street preachers, Christians, usually men, who want to exercise their rights under the law, their rights to freedom of association, their rights to share their faith, have been arrested routinely. See, what has happened to policing in Britain, sadly, is that it has become politicized. And the College of Policing, which provides the rule book for the way in which people should go about, the police should go about enforcing the law, has become, it would appear, an extension of a particular arm of left-wing, not liberal, but totalitarian society. And so what we're seeing is that the police, and there are examples of this, you'll find this on social media, are exercising their rightfully given legal powers, but they're exercising them in an inappropriate way. And we've seen a number of cases that have been brought before the courts where the police have been forced to apologize and to admit that they were wrong, to say that what they did was wrongful, there were wrongful arrests, and indeed to provide compensation, financial compensation to the victims. So what are we saying here today? Britain exists as a culture of law and order because the police have traditionally governed and carried out their work by consent. Remember, the police they're not the military. The police in Britain are ordinary citizens who have been given particular powers of arrest. Citizens themselves have powers of arrest, but the police have a higher level of authority in enforcing the law. And of course, they have the power of the uniform and a great many other aids on their side. And we, the British people, support the police. What we do not support, nor should individual police officers themselves, is the politicization of the police. And that's what's happened. Recently, I was on a peaceful protest in London, and this was about probably 1.5 million British citizens, including men, women, children, people of all ages, backgrounds, ethnicities, walks of life, beliefs and values, saying we do not want to have a papers please society. We do not want, nor should it be required, that we have to produce evidence of vaccine or any other health-related matter. We do not want a system of medical apartheid. And what I found interesting was that the streets were lined with police officers, and there were 3 large vans which were occupied by members of what's called the TSG, the Territorial Support Group. Now this is a tremendously important part of policing. They are there to deal with violence and violent riots, things like Antifa in America and BLM in this country, Extinction Rebellion. People who go about their business to disrupt the normal activities of law-abiding British citizens. But this was a peaceful protest, and what is interesting is that the police would not engage, they would not chat to or speak with members of the community who were out there. And yet, if you look at the Notting Hill Carnival, the police are out there, they're dancing, they're taking their uniform off, and they're being part of the communities. What is the difference, we have to ask? What has happened? And it is the politicization of the police force in Britain. That is our concern. That is what we need to have questions asked about in Parliament, in the media. We need the BBC to get on board. And most of all, we need the police, who are after all ordinary citizens, who have children, they have mothers and sisters and daughters. We need them to ask questions. Now here's something very interesting. In the Metropolitan Police area, where I worked for a number of years, there are grave concerns that the metropolitan area of London, which is governed by that really wonderful police force, has become much less safe for women and for girls. And that is really interesting because the Metropolitan Police Commissioner is a woman called Cressida Dick. Now, under her watch, serious problems have arisen. There have been many calls for her resignation. Strangely enough, she's still in office. And no one can understand exactly what's going on, but here again, it is down to the politicization of the police force. So we need to address this. Britain is a country based on law and order. It's based on respect. It is the country that introduced cricket to the world, and that's all about fair play and playing by the rules. So why have I been talking about the police? Firstly, it's because I greatly support and love the work that our police officers do, so let's be very clear about that. But what we cannot do, now there have always been bad apples in any organisation than there have been in the police. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the bad apples who need to be rooted out or the corruption. Not talking about that at all. We're talking about the systemic politicisation of the police. That has got to stop, and I call upon Parliament, I call upon our British media, I call upon the people of Britain, and mostly on police officers themselves, to rise up and say, we want to do our jobs, we want the police to do their jobs properly, we want a safe society. We, the people, want to support the police, which is what we do, but we do not want them to be politicised. Thank you for listening. I'll be coming to you more with further videos which deal with these contemporary, challenging and highly important issues.